This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. As we turn now to Iraq, where Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and his allies look poised for sweeping victory in provincial polls held Saturday. Official results will not be published for weeks, but leaders of rival Shia parties acknowledged today Maliki's state of law coalition appears to be heading for a strong win in some Shia areas. Prime Minister Maliki gave a televised address after the polls closed Saturday.
As we conclude this national epic vote, we'll be impatient to learn the results. I hope this will be a strong motivation for the continuation of the political process. Moreover, I hope that we will forget all the troubles that prevailed during the period before the election to build Iraq's future.
Iraqi citizen Abbas lauded the government for the heavy security and relative lack of violence on Election Day.
The security situation was very good, and the citizens felt safe to go to the polling centers, and even felt free to choose the list that they wanted. No one was feeling pressure on him, and this is the simple right of a citizen.
Only half of Iraq's 14 million registered voters went to the polls Saturday, the lowest turnout in elections held since the U.S.-led invasion. Many Iraqi and U.S. officials hailed the elections as a success. President Obama called them, quote, a victory for all Iraqis. But tens of thousands of internally displaced Iraqis were unable to cast their vote. Secular politician Mithal al-Lusi said that many people who had been forced to move from their homes because of violence could not vote because their names were not on the voter lists.
The major crime by the Independent Electoral Commission, and I am skeptical of this independence as they are weak in front of the bigger parties and were appointed by these big parties. The major crime is at the expense of the refugees. Tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands in Mosul, Baghdad, Kut, Diwaniyah, Amara, Muthanna, Nazriya. In all of the Iraqi provinces, they were unable to vote.
I'm joined right now here in the Firehouse studio by independent journalist David Enders and Rick Rowley of Big Noise Films. They've reported from Iraq for the past few years. Rick just flew in from Baghdad this morning. Welcome both to Democracy Now! Rick, let's start with you. Describe what happened on Saturday. Set the scene for us.
Well, it was actually really surprising to us, as it has been the last few years we've been there, the improvement in security. We were worried. There were threats of violence. We were worried about the curfew being really hard. So we spent the night in Sadr City with Fatah Sheikh, the leading Sadr's candidate there, and in the morning went out to vote, and it felt more like a holiday than like a voting day. I mean, the traffic was shut down, so there were hundreds of soccer games on the streets, like the children were out in the streets. But traveling around the city, the turnout was remarkably low. None of the polling stations looked particularly busy. Sadr City seemed like one of the busier areas, possibly because there are fewer internally displaced people from Sadr City. And talking to people as they were coming out, we met many people who said they were voting for Maliki, as the preliminary results suggest, and they were voting for him as the most expedient way to end the occupation. So I think, an important thing to remember is the U.S. likes to try to cast elections in Iraq as referendums on the legitimacy of the occupation, to see every election as proof that America has defeated the insurgency. But many Iraqis saw the votes they were casting in this election, as a way to end the American occupation.
The positions of all of the parties?
Well, yes. I think it's a testament to the strength of the military and political strength of especially the Shia resistance, that all the parties, with the exception of ISKI, the Islamic Party that was the big winner in the elections of 2005, all of the parties are calling for publicly a rapid American withdrawal, as quick as is expedient. And Majlis al-Ala, the ISKI, the Islamist party that won in the last election, appears to have been swept from power based on the preliminary results that we have right now.
What happened with the car bombing this weekend?
There was, there have been several car bombings. There has been a lot of election-related violence. Less than in previous years, but still a significant amount. The other candidate that we were following closely was Sheikh Afan, who's the leading candidate of the awakening militias in Fallujah. And there has been constant fighting between him and the Iraqi Islamic Party, his main opponent inside Fallujah. And there was a car bomb while we were filming with him, where 2 of his men were killed and 2 were sent to the hospital. The awakening militias, which have been armed and funded by the Americans, I mean, in our America's main military proxies inside of Anbar have publicly said that if they do not win these elections, there'll be a revolution in Anbar. Basically, what the U.S. has set up a system of tribal sheikhs who control Anbar for them, who have massive military and economic power. Hundreds of millions, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in reconstruction contracts, and 100,000 member strong militia that's under their control. And if they don't get political power through these elections to match their economic and military power, then they say that there's going to be trouble. And
the significance of Maliki winning?
It is remarkable. Dawa was a minor party. Maliki was chosen as a compromise prime minister because all the major Shiite factions couldn't decide on who they wanted to have in power. He was seen by many as a puppet of Iski, the Islamists who were the major power brokers in the last elections. But because of pressure from the Sadrists, both political pressure inside parliament and also a constant military pressure as an armed resistance outside, he was forced to take a very strong line in negotiating with the Americans and get a SOFA agreed to status of forces agreement that was signed in December that is remarkable. That basically appears on paper to be an end to the occupation. All of the U.S. bases will be removed. The U.S. can never use Iraq as a platform from which to launch attacks on other parts of the region. They don't get the oil. They don't get immunity for their contractors. If the letter of this agreement is actually put in place, it will mean what the Sadrists and all of the more militant wings on the outside have called for anyway. So whereas the Americans used to say, or said in 2005, every vote is a vote in favor of the American presence and for the occupation. In this case, the insurgency has managed to change the frame so much inside of internal Iraqi politics that a vote for Maliki looks like a vote against the occupation and a vote for the Americans to get out as quickly as they can.
David Enders, you've been covering Iraq for years now. What is the significance of all of this? What are the prospects now for Iraq?
Well, I think it's exactly right, especially the issue of the status of forces agreement. Maliki has managed to really make himself look good in a sense in negotiating with the Americans, and I think people have responded to that. He's also, at the same time, been able to use the American military to bring behind the Iraqi army stability to both Basra and Baghdad, and people are responding to that. Any Iraqi on the street will say, you ask them, what do you want? The first thing they say is security, then electricity, then a job. And so any sense that any of that is returning certainly helps Prime Minister al-Maliki's case. Now, that's Baghdad, Basra, central and southern Iraq. Northern Iraq, the 3 Kurdish governorates didn't vote. Kirkuk, there were no elections in Kirkuk, which is contested between Arab tribes and Kurdish tribes, and there's the ongoing debate within the Iraqi government over whether Kirkuk should become part of the basically autonomous Kurdish region. And at every chance the Iraqi government has had to legislate that, they've been unable to do so. In 2004, with the governing council, the issue was tabled. In the Constitution, in 2006, the issue was tabled, and again, the issue has been tabled. And you have increased threats of violence. You're still seeing sectarian violence, or rather ethnic violence in Mosul, the 2nd largest city in the country. There's still fighting going on there. So even though there are some very positive aspects to what happened this weekend, there's a lot left unresolved.
And overall, the power of the Kurds now?
I think it's been weakened. I think their position has been considerably weakened by al-Maliki's apparent popularity. And one thing, in addition to the status of forces agreement, Maliki has presented himself as a nationalist to some extent and is calling for a unified Iraq. And it certainly seems that calls for dividing the country into a loose federalist state, which, according to some observers, was entirely inevitable a couple years ago, and especially with the gains made by the Supreme Council for the Islamic Revolution and the Kurdish parties in the 2005 elections, that seemed like a distinct possibility. Now it seems that forces that would keep Iraq intact are growing in power.
The reaction to the election of Barack Obama
was very muted. Sheikh Irfan actually